Hey, welcome back to Atypical Talk. This is a podcast where we have conversations that illuminate the intersection of faith, culture, and the common spaces of our humanity. I'm Abby.
And I'm Joel. And today we're joined by my friend and friend of the pod, Brent Faulkner, who is the Connections Pastor at Crossroads Community Church here in Kokomo. And he's a good friend of mine. We're in a Bible study together, get to hang out most weeks and have incredible conversations, and just appreciate the way that he sees the world and the way that he loves people. And he recently wrote and published his very first book that we're going to get to discuss today.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about it because I think it's a really incredible work and an important work. And so I'm excited to talk about that a little bit later. But thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, we're excited.
So we're going to be talking a little bit about rest today. So I want to start off asking, what is your favorite way to rest?
Oh, what is rest? No, it feels very elusive in this moment just because we just had our third child 6 weeks ago, Lucy Jane. And right now it's like between changing diapers, trying to get her settled and feeding her, and then keeping our 3-year-old and 5-year-old alive. It feels like home is not the most restful spot. Right. I will say that right now, my favorite way to rest is to lay flat on my back with Lucy laying on my chest, just sound asleep. And as long as I can get that going, nice. It feels like there's no troubles in the world at all. But that's like at home right now is just crazy for us. When you think about like activities that help me feel like I'm resting, I'm a really weird learner, and I'm actually someone who enjoys learning as rest too. But I've learned that I'm an auditory learner, which is the most rare type and style of learning. I'm not like a hands-on learner. I'm not even a visual learner as much as I am someone who hears something and I retain it. And so podcasts, here we are. Podcast is like one of the greatest things for me. So like finding an interview with a fascinating person, or a news podcast, or something about leadership or the Bible or ministry. I love just like taking a walk and listening to a podcast, or having an earbud in, going to my mom's pool now that the weather's nice, and just floating around listening to a podcast or two.
Yeah.
So that's very restful for me. That's just how I do it.
Yeah.
What about you, Brent?
I'm big in nature. I like to be out in nature. That just helps me kind of rest. And one of the things that one of my favorite places to be is, and Joel experienced this the other week, just around the campfire with friends and family.
He loves a campfire. I love it.
But there's just something about that forces me to kind of just sit and slow down and take things in. And
I love that.
They have this amazing property, and it's just like peaceful and a lot of land, and it's just like, it is like a very special, restful place just sitting out around your campfire. I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah.
What about you?
For me, I like laying out my hammock, and so if I can find like a beautiful spot in the woods with a stream nearby, but no bugs. I haven't found that
place. This is very
yet.
specific. Like a place where there's a stream in nature, no bugs. Yep. The sun needs to be at a 45-degree angle.
But that, I mean, I listen to like rain sounds when I go to sleep. And so if it's also raining, like that would be great. But yeah, I think anything out in nature, like Brent was saying, like I love being out in nature and relaxing and hiking, and yeah, it's so restful.
I have fallen asleep on a hammock one time, and I woke up by falling off of the hammock. And so now I have an irrational fear of actually being in a hammock, because I'm like, I'm going down. It was a terrible way to wake up.
Did the hammock just break?
No, I think I twisted. I turned, and it wasn't like a great hammock, but I just turned the right way, shifted my weight enough to where I like woke up with my face hitting dirt. So that was pretty awesome. Very restful.
Our first topic today is a Relevant magazine article titled, "Why Are We All So Uncomfortable with Silence and Rest?" The author of the article, Cassie Appleton, says our lives are a never-ending cycle of intake and outtake, input and output. The word bored has become obsolete in our culture. Entertainment is always within the click of a button or a swipe of a screen. The squares on our calendars struggle for breathing room, and in the hurry, we hardly recognize that the air's become thin for us too. She says, I think that sometimes we're so quick to fill the space and launch ourselves back into comfort that we forget to question why the presence of space bothered us in the first place. I was listening to a sermon by John Mark Comer on the dark night of the soul. He talks about how when we are in a dark night, we are in a time of refining and stripping down. The end goal being a heart posture of trust in God himself, not in our feelings or ideas about who God is. I don't know about you, she says, but I want to become more like the righteousness of God. And the only way to do that is to let go of the illusion of control and allow God to tend to the spaces in my heart that are not like him. So would you say you struggle with being in silence or resting, and why or why not?
Definitely a struggle for me. It is. I have great seasons where I feel like I've got like a rhythm of it, and then usually a big life event or stress in one area of my life, I feel like I resonate with this so much because silence can be terrifying. Like just being alone with your thoughts and hearing your own breathing, it can be terrifying because it does strip you down and slow you down to where it's just you and God, or just you and your own mind. And there is something of an intimacy in that can be scary. So I struggle with it. I've had seasons where I feel like I do a great job and it's part of my decompressing from work, and then I don't feel like I'm in a good one right now. I feel like I just feel like because there are times that I've been really good at, like when I leave work, my drive home is just in silence, no podcast, no music, just me and my thoughts sort of recapping my day and praying. And that is Joel in a healthy way. And I feel like right now silence sounds like work. It kind of sounds like I have to like do something and process, which is challenging right now in this season. But this was such a great reminder of, hey, you are healthier, when you actually have those moments. But it is a struggle for me. My mind can just be going in a million places all at once, and I get used to the noise of it, and kind of numbs me in a way that's probably less than optimal.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I feel like I'm really realizing how much I struggle with silence and resting right now, because Nico, our next gen pastor, and I, we just got back from high school camp, and the whole theme of the week was rest. And so they challenged us with this 21-day challenge to only spend 15 minutes a day on social media and video games. And so it's been weird to like wake up and not immediately check my Facebook notifications and things like that. Like I caught myself yesterday. That was the first thing I did, and I immediately closed it. I was like, wait, I'm not supposed to be doing this.
You threw your phone across the room.
But it's so weird how much of a habit those things have become, and how different it is now that I'm like putting those off to the side. Yeah. But what about you, Brent?
Yeah. Well, so I'm an introvert. So I actually recharge. I don't have a problem being off by myself. But what struck me in the article, and I think I really resonated with, is she talked about the lack of a to-do list, or kind of the lack of purpose. And that's the one for me. If I'm off by myself, I still need something to like, hey, my job is to mow the yard right now, or my job is to do
a couple
this.
tasks that maybe don't drain you emotionally, but you can still do.
And that sense of purpose, that sense of completion, look what I've accomplished. And I think it's when that is lacking for me, then is where it becomes unsettling. And like, okay, what am I supposed to do with my time? I remember a few years ago, I had the opportunity, I had a time and some space where I was able to do, I did a 5-day silence and solitude retreat. And that was the first time I'd ever done anything that long. I'd taken a day here and a day there, but for 5 days. And so I went into it excited. I was like, oh, this is going to be just sweet time with God. And, like, this is going to be awesome. And it was a wrestling match.
Oh, really? Yeah.
5 days.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I just went off by myself and camped, and, but I had nothing planned. I had no purpose in it. And just like, being there with your own thoughts and being face to face with, the own parts of yourself that you kind of try to hide and suppress, and having to wrestle with that. And ultimately it was a really good experience, just the way that God showed up and helped point things out in my heart that maybe I'd been kind of ignoring for a long time, or just the noise and busyness of life keeps you from investigating and getting curious about. But it was good, but it wasn't fun.
Yeah.
You get that time where you're like, oh, I'm just looking at the clock again. Like, how long was that? Is that just, it's not even been an hour? Okay. Yeah. But it showed that wrestling match. I mean, I think that's just real, how we feel when we're so programmed to go and build and accomplish and do. I understand that. I think that's such a challenge. I just think that there's something that's very vulnerable to me about just like literally just being with your own thoughts, and then believing the presence of God is there, and you're like, you can't smoke screen it. You can't like have a conversation out of it. It's a really interesting thing. But as she mentions in the article, like that teaching from John Mark Comer about the dark night of the soul, there's something that is very fruitful and deep work that can happen in those moments. I think about in the seasons where I would have silence before I would be heading back home after a day of work. I felt like I would come in and I'd be clearer. I wouldn't be as like weighed down maybe from hard conversations or open tasks that I haven't completed yet. And I was just a better husband and a better dad, and I could just be present in that time because I had like kind of cleared the RAM of my processing system to like be. So it is a beautiful gift, and it's one that I would love for us all to take more to heart. I think we should just now, like in every one of our services on Sundays, we should have like 2 minutes of complete silence and just see people lose their minds.
Yeah.
They would just lose their minds.
It would seem like an eternity.
They would feel like, oh my gosh, somebody's got to have to yell or say something, or someone's got to sneeze, but they're trying to hold it because they think it'll be awkward and they think it's louder. I just can't imagine. But
Yep.
it's good practice.
Well, I think too, how many times when I do have space, I fill it, a podcast or social media or watching something, like 2 minutes of silence. We have very few, spaces of that. One of the quotes in the article that stuck out to me, she's quoting Comer in that sermon, and she said, Comer reflects that there's something about losing control that does a great work of freedom in us. And maybe rest is not discovered through feeling in control of the stillness and spaces I find myself in. And I think that was the challenging one for me, is that, I can be intentional and I can have quiet and space if I feel in control of it. But it's those moments where you're out of control, or you're sitting and waiting on someone else to respond, or you just kind of feel stuck. Those are the ones that are the most difficult to really wrestle through. But I love what he said, that's where we find the greatest freedom of what God does, the work he does in us.
And I think for me, as I mentioned a couple times, vulnerability, feeling vulnerable in silence, that is the other side of control, right? Control, you feel strong, like you can will it to happen, but vulnerability feels like, I don't know what's going to happen. I can't will this to happen. Yeah. I think that speaks so well to the challenge that I feel in silence, is that like, I can't make it happen. What do I do now? But the gift that is, and how that's like, vulnerability and humility, that is like the entryway into the kingdom of God, and being a part of what God is doing is by recognizing what's in our hands, which is nothing. And I think like that's where I love the freedom that can come from that. It's good. Yeah.
Our second topic today is a religion news article titled Australian Leader Criticizes X, formerly Twitter, for failing to remove church violence content. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on Monday criticized social media platform X for refusing to remove graphic posts about a knife attack on a bishop and priest in a Sydney church last week. X Corp announced last week it would fight in court Australian orders to take down posts relating to the knife attack. The platform's global government affairs team said on Saturday Australia's e-safety commissioner Julie Inman-Grant has ordered it to remove some posts that commented on the church attack, but it said the posts did not violate X's rules on violent speech. Social media has a social responsibility, Albanese told reporters. I find it extraordinary that X chose not to comply and are trying to argue their case. The material is geo-blocked from Australia, but remains available elsewhere. So do you think that content like this should be up? I know, a lot of people are pushing for free speech, and footage for this should stay up so that we can see what's happening. But what do you guys think?
What do you think, Brent? This is complicated.
This is above my pay grade.
Yeah, we are not speaking as experts to any of this, for sure. But yeah. I
think it's worth just identifying the tension that you feel. So the one tension is like, I don't want to live in a world where everything is so heavily censored that I don't know reality, right? That people are making decisions on what gets to me, and I also realize that's probably currently happening. Yeah. But on the other hand, I think there is an insensitivity. If you're just like everything through. I totally understand in the article they were talking about the desire to protect the victims and how, they've experienced this trauma, and then to go online and see the live stream being shared and talked about, and how re-traumatizing that is. And so I understand the heart there too. And I don't have an answer, but I think too often we fall off on one side or the other and fail to live in the tension of okay, I understand this perspective, I don't know what the right one is, maybe wisdom's somewhere in between. But I think having that heart for people, but also wanting to elevate truth and access to truth as well.
I totally agree. I mean, I see both sides pretty clearly, and I'm uncomfortable overall with like some group of people deciding what can be public or not. Like, I just think that, not to like make a slippery slope argument, but like, who's choosing the deciders, and like where could this go, along those lines. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I'm a little bit confused why there couldn't be like maybe like an age kind of thing pop up, because you can have a Twitter account and be how old? Like, isn't like it's probably 16, 13 or something like that.
13, yeah.
So it's not like, everybody could, but so I just think that there were some in between ways that could probably make this safer. But I would also just ask, like, the actual footage, like, what is the good that it's serving for us to like see people killed or maimed or hurt? You know what I mean? Like, what is the social good that can come from that? There's a difference for me, like, free speech being the headline and seeing what happened is different than the actual footage of what happened. And I just consider like family members or people just getting on a platform and seeing these horrendous things happen. I mean, I'm a free speech person, and I think the best antidote for bad speech is sunlight, and people like seeing what's going on, and then those voices probably wouldn't be as loud, and there wouldn't be this echo chamber of terrible things happening in the underbelly of the internet. But I think inside of these kind of questions is like, what is the social good of actually seeing this event compared to knowing that it happened, and knowing where it happened, and how can we help prevent it again? So Andy Stanley, pastor from Atlanta, has this question that he asks all the time, that I come back to a lot in these situations, and trying to figure out what wisdom is, what the right thing to do is. And he says that we should always ask the question, if we're Christ followers, what does love require of me? And so, as I'm approaching this, I'm like, what is the loving way to approach a situation like this? It's probably not watching a video and sharing it and sort of sensationalizing it more than it already is. It definitely is more than just even reading a headline. It's probably like asking deeper questions and seeing if there's any way that I could be a solution to the tragedies that befall communities like this and around our communities as well. So I lean towards free speech, but I wonder what the bounds should be, especially when it comes to video content, the actual things that happen. And maybe just having a little window that could pop up and making sure that no one's, or at least I mean, I don't think it's clear from the article, but I just like, if this is some distributing video that you have to click on to actually
like
watch violent content, then you have to click on it to see it.
Yeah.
That's a safeguard for a kid who gets their parents' iPad or something like that and is just accidentally on it. So I think those are also just, living in the tensions like Brent mentioned, but considering what's loving and what's safe and what's beneficial.
And I think what you were getting at is a good distinction of, do we actually need to see the actual live stream of the shooting, or can we is there other ways to get that information out? And I think it's worth just reflecting just in each of our own hearts, like,
why do we want to see
why? Yeah. Why are we drawn to those things? Like there have been times where there's been major events of like explosions or, just these tragic events. And there's something in me that is like, I want to see this. Well, why? What is that?
The car crash, right?
Yeah.
The train wreck. Yeah. And so, that's not feeding the good stuff in us. It doesn't feed the healthy.
What is that doing to our souls? And exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we wanted to give some time for Brent just to discuss his first, not his last, I'm sure, his first book that he has published. It is called Trust Fall: How the Fall of Man Reveals a God Worth Trusting. And it is an awesome book. I think it is a very important book. It is a foundational book, in my opinion, on how we understand God's character and how we understand the things that we do and why we do them. And I think these are very important things. So, Brent, thanks, man. Thanks for stepping out and doing this and putting this into the world. I just wanted to start there. I think it's good, and I think it's important, and I can't imagine the work that you put into it, but man, it is worth it, every bit of it. And I just wanted to start by asking you, like, why were you drawn to this topic of the fall of man and Genesis 1-3, and why did you sort of start swirling in these ideas?
Well, I'm just weird like that. No. Well, so it really has been a multiple year journey for me, and a lot of it started by me coming across different resources to help me see that Genesis story in new ways and new perspectives that just kind of really opened up the biblical story in fresh ways. And so one of those resources was the Bible Project. They have podcasts and videos, and Dr. Tim Mackey is the guy that leads that. And just the way that they connect back to Genesis and really see the things that happen in Genesis 1-3 and really kind of even Genesis 1-11 as foundational that just get echoed and played off of and built upon in the rest of the biblical story. Some of that content has really been helpful. And then, Joel, you and I have been walking through the Bema Discipleship podcast, and Marty Solomon has a lot of great content, just helping see Genesis, particularly Genesis 1-3 in those ways. And so there were just a series of several years where those new perspectives were just popping up and gave me a hunger to really dig in and study and read myself. And then I took some of those learnings and discoveries and put them as different groups that I've led in different settings at the church, and added some of my perspectives or learnings from the study onto some of the things that I've learned from those other resources. And about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago at this point, I'd finished up one of those group studies, and it was the last week, and we wrapped up, and I was driving home and just reflecting about how the study went, and I just had this thought. I don't want it to be like over spiritualized, but
it was God.
It was God.
That kind of thing,
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
No, but I really just had a thought, and the thought was just crystal clear in my mind that this should be a book. And I had no plans to write. I didn't have any, goals to be an author. It just really felt like this was something that God laid on my heart. And so I started pursuing it and researched more and studied more, and started writing, and felt like I at least building upon the ideas of those resources and some other people, and I felt like I at least had enough unique thought that I could, with integrity, put out a book and put my name on it. And so it's been a neat journey. And for me, the book really focuses in on Genesis chapter 3, the story of the fall of man.
Which is just like, that's awesome. But I want to drill down into like, why is it focused there? Like, isn't that something that like, that's thousands and thousands of years old? It's Old Testament too. Like, it's not anything to do with how we interact with God today. Like, why do you feel like Genesis 3 and 1-3 specifically is foundational for us and how we see our lives and see God today?
Yeah, well, I think it really gets built, like I said, it gets built upon and reflected in the rest of the biblical story.
Yeah.
And then if that's the case, then if we have misunderstandings of that, then that's going to impact then how we understand the gospel and what Jesus came to do and the whole goal of what God is trying to accomplish throughout history. And I realized as I was just studying and thinking and reflecting, particularly Genesis chapter 3 with the story of the fall of man, is something that we are all so familiar with, right? It's in children's Bibles. You see the iconic images of, Adam and Eve and the fig leaves and the snake and the apple on the tree. Yeah. And we reference it, there's so many times that we talk about the gospel and we kind of start with this idea of Genesis 3, like, oh, well, we're all sinners, we've all sinned, and this is what Jesus came to fix. And so we reference it all the time. We're familiar with it, but we really very rarely actually study it. So it's this thing that we kind of know, we think we know it. But as I dug into it and really, really studied it and read through and looked at it, I began to realize that, man, there are all these things that I've missed that I thought I knew it, but we don't really deeply study it. And
that is so good. It's like the lullaby effect, right?
That's
something that you've
exactly right.
heard so long, and it's just sort of been in the background, but you don't think about the content of the lyrics, and you don't really understand what's really going on, because it's just kind of always been the water that you swam in. So I think that is so true. Just to study and look at the fall, which can be such a foundational thing for how we understand God and ourselves, that makes it really powerful.
Yeah. And because so many times we approach it as either it's kind of just this fairy tale story, or we only see the sin piece in it, and it's kind of almost used as like just a setup for the gospel, kind of like a setup for a punchline of a joke or something, and we just kind of like really quickly mention like, oh yeah, and we're all sinners, but Jesus came. And well, if we really want to truly understand what's going on there, then that impacts how we understand the gospel and what the whole purpose of what Jesus is trying to accomplish and how God feels about us.
Something you touched on there, I just want to drill down on for a second, is you mentioned like if you start with Genesis 3, sometimes we can just get to that, you're a sinner, you're a problem that needs to be fixed by Jesus. What value do you see in looking at before the fall and what God says about us, and why do you find that to be foundational?
Yeah, that's good. Because the biblical story does not start in Genesis chapter 3.
What?
There's 2 other chapters.
Oh man,
a lot
it's
of
doing the math.
things,
It's so interesting. Yeah.
No, I think that's huge, because we see that and you've said this before, that sin is an intruder into the story. That God's intent, it didn't start, with humans being sinful. Like the story starts with goodness. The creation poem you see again and again, God looking at what he created and declaring that it was good. After the 6 days, he sees everything and he declares this is very good. So it starts with goodness. I talk in the book about how it starts with abundance. So God places them in the garden, and we talk about focus on kind of the tree that's off limits. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we place all of our focus on that, and that Adam and Eve, ate that fruit and it was forbidden and all that stuff. But when you read the story there, it says that in the garden, there were all kinds of trees.
It's not there. The only tree there. You're right. Like, it's so interesting. There's all kinds of trees.
And then God gives them permission to eat from all these other trees and freely enjoy them. So it's all of these. It's really an orchard more than we think maybe as a garden. And it's all open for them to enjoy. It's a picture of God's abundance and blessing. And so I think that understanding starting there, that's God's intent for creation. And anything else is a deviation from God's intent.
Yeah.
So one of the main ideas throughout the book is about, inside the fall, is about the perception deception, is what you call it. Can you help us understand, like, what is the perception deception, and maybe give us an example of one area of our lives that it takes over and how it messes things up?
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things that I really wanted to try to help illustrate in the book is that sin is a symptom of other things going on. It's a symptom of deeper problems, and we fail to miss that, and then we place all of the focus just on sin. And if we do that, we're only treating the symptom of a deeper problem.
Putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole kind of thing.
Exactly.
Dealing with the deeper thing, yeah.
And then you just get caught in a cycle there. And so when you look at the story, it starts out in Genesis chapter 3. One of the first things is suddenly this serpent appears in the story, and there's all kinds of things that we could get into with that. But he looks at the woman and he says, did God really say you shouldn't eat from any fruit of the trees? And he takes what God said and he distorts it. There's a little bit of deception in there. And what I realized is what he's doing is he's trying to get Eve to focus on the scarcity of what she doesn't have, or the one little thing that's off limits, and lose sight of the abundance that God has blessed them with. Mm-hmm. And so I came up with this term, perception deception, and kind of trademark,
yeah.
Brent Faulkner, and kind of defined it this way: that perception deception it's a perspective shift where we begin to see abundance as scarcity, and blessing as affliction. And so we lose sight of the abundance and see only what we don't have, and we lose sight of God's blessing and see almost see it as a punishment. And so one of the examples I give in the book is when I was in high school, my grandparents had this Buick, 1987 Buick Skylark station wagon. And my grandparents drove it. My uncle drove it when he was in college. And then when I turned 16 and got my license, they gave it to me. And so it was well loved by the time that I got that car. But it was a gift. Like I didn't have to buy my own car. It was a gift. Like suddenly now I have this car. And so it's this generous gift from my grandparents to me. And so, I saw the goodness of the gift, and it was a blessing until my good friend turned 16 and his parents bought him a brand new Chevy Camaro with T-tops. And so suddenly in the high school parking lot, having my station wagon next to that Camaro, my perspective shifted. Yeah. And so what was this abundance? I have a car that's mine to drive. Suddenly I saw the scarcity of, I suddenly saw all the rust on it, and I saw the cracked headlight, and all these things that were wrong with it. And what I thought originally was a blessing from my grandparents, now I viewed it as this affliction. Like, why didn't my parents get me this why did I have to get this used car? Why didn't I get a brand new car? And it's just those subtle perspective shifts that I think all of us, we face those in all the aspects of our life. We fail to see the goodness and abundance and blessing of God because we have a bent, we have an enemy that tries to distort and deceive, and it's so easy for us to focus just on scarcity, what we don't have. There's not enough time, not enough money, I'm not enough, and then we focus on the affliction instead of seeing the blessing that God wants to pour out in us.
That's awesome. So talking about the fall of man, which always it's tinted with like darkness, like this is the dark part of the story, this is the bad part of the story, this is evil, right? You've subtitled the book how the fall of man reveals a God worth trusting. You really are finding light and hope inside of what's often painted as a dark story. Like, what's maybe your main learning through your studies and through the book of like the light that comes from us studying the fall of man, the goodness that comes from us studying the fall of man, what we see about God in a beautiful way from studying this story?
It was just another reminder of God's faithfulness. And really what I do in the book, the first half of the book, I kind of walk through, I focus more on Adam and Eve's actions and how they take steps away from God, and their trust in God is broken, it falls. But then the second half of the book, I really focus in on God and kind of relook at some of those same stories from God's perspective. And, it's there to see, but we often just so focus on the actions of Adam and Eve, we miss the faithfulness of God, that, so many little ways that God shows up, meets them in their need, where they are. So things like when Adam and Eve, it talks about them running and hiding in shame because after they ate the fruit. And what is God doing in that story? God's looking for them. He's seeking them out and calling their name. And so often we have this idea of like when we sin that God is disappointed with us or pushes us away or turns his back on us. But right there from the very first story of the first sin, you see God's not pulling away. It's Adam and Eve that pull away in fear and shame, but God is pursuing them. He's calling out their name. And it was just a beautiful reminder of God's faithfulness and his grace and his mercy. Another great example in there is later there's just one little line that talks about how God clothed them in animal skins. And
from their shame of nakedness, right?
Yeah. So that's God's original intent is this idea of they're naked and felt no shame. And I talk in the book about how I think that is not so much about physical nakedness, but it's a metaphor for the type of relationship that God wants us to have with Him and wants us to have with each other. To be, when you're naked, you're not hiding anything. You're fully yourself, fully known, and fully loved and fully accepted. And so when does clothing first pop in the story? It's after Adam and Eve sin, and now they have this shame, and so they make these fig leaves to cover themselves. And then so I think it's interesting then when God finds them and He meets them and He clothes them. It's interesting because that's not God's intent. Like, God wanted them to be naked, but he doesn't lecture them. He doesn't tell them what they're doing is wrong and they shouldn't be wearing clothes or any of that stuff. He meets them in their shame, and he takes care of a problem that he didn't cause. And then, of course, I think there's interesting connections. It doesn't say it in Scripture, but typically to get animal, leather clothing, you have to sacrifice an animal to get to it. So that means the first sacrifice was initiated by God to fix a problem he didn't cause. And I think there's incredible glimpses of echoes of Jesus.
Some things all the way through.
Yeah. Boom, Jesus.
Beautiful.
And the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, I think, intentionally playing off of this story, talks about how we are now clothed in Christ, and clothed in his righteousness. And so I just the real heart of what I wanted to accomplish with the book is just to see that, to shift that perspective. God's not angry or disappointed or turning his back on us. He is pursuing us. He is making a way to reach us and restore us. And that's the whole biblical story, is God's restoration project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for those listeners who are saying, I'm ready to buy the book, where can they go to get it?
It's on Amazon.
What? Really?
Go to Amazon, search. If you search Trust Fall and then my name, Brent Faulkner, you'll go right to it. There's a large number of romance novels called Trust Fall.
Really?
Give me some interesting ordering from like people just getting a gift. Oh, Trust Fall. This is Fabio.
Yeah, Trust Fall, Brent Faulkner will lead you right to it. It's on barnesandnobles.com. So I have the ebook version. There's an audio book version on Audible.
And you read it, right?
Yeah, narrated.
That's
you can hear my beautiful voice all the time.
It's game changer. It's good for the auditory learner in the room. Right? That's great.
And for those that are local here in Kokomo, I think there are still a few copies at Cross America.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we're trying to figure out a time here at Bridgeway over the next year to get Brent to come and speak and maybe do a couple weeks on this on Sundays and move some books and get the conversation going. Because like I said earlier, I think it's an important conversation. I think it's a powerful conversation. It's so foundational to how we see ourselves and see God. I like thinking about the Genesis stories at the beginning of the scriptures as origin stories, and not just like how we got here and how long did it take and how many days and all that kind of stuff, but more origin stories of why we are the way that we are and why we respond the way that we do, and God sort of meeting us there all the way.
And that Genesis 3 story, it's not so much about Adam and Eve, it's really a story about all of us.
Yeah.
Right? How we all begin to lose trust in God. We all can be deceived, and we all choose to walk away, but it's God's then faithful pursuit.
Yep.
That's what it's all about. So, man, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We'll link in the show notes how to purchase a book. And, thanks, man. We really appreciate you being part of the conversation today.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Well, that's it for this episode of Atypical Talk. If you have any topics or questions, you can send those to atypicaltalkpod@gmail.com. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Atypical Talk Pod, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get updates when new episodes go live. We hope that these conversations today have helped you think wider, love deeper, and partner with God to bring the up there, down here in your everyday life. Thanks for listening.